last one.
30,000.
30,000.
Okay.
Here you go. Thank you very much.
I don't understand why you keep pushing this away. We need a solution.
It's not that simple. You know the risks involved if we proceed with this plan.
This is very good quality, only 15.
Okay, I'll take it. Here you go.
Thank you very much.
This approach will significantly speed up the construction phase.
But we must ensure
the structural integrity is.
Pack up.
These are the sweetest ones we have today.
All right, I'll take 3 of them.
Perfect. Thank you for your purchase.
I thought I knew the answer, but the longer I stand here, the less certain I become.
The morning air was still cool when Tu Diep stepped out of her small wooden house, clutching the old straw hat that had shielded her from the sun countless times before. The countryside was quiet, except for the rustle of leaves and the distant barking of a dog. Dew clung to the tips of the grass, and a faint mist lingered above the garden. It was another day of work, another day of finding peace in simplicity. Tu Diep had lived through storms of love, loss, and loneliness. Once married, now divorced, she had long accepted her place in life, quiet, humble, and solitary. Yet, ever since she met James, the wealthy CEO who had once extended his hand to help her when she was at her lowest, her heart had been anything but quiet. She often wondered if this feeling was love or merely gratitude. This morning, her thoughts wandered as she prepared breakfast, simple rice porridge and a few slices of salted egg. She thought of James staying late at the farm the night before, checking on her when she had a fever. He had refused to leave until her temperature dropped, even sleeping on a chair by the door. She remembered waking in the night and seeing him there, his coat draped over her blanket, his face calm but tired. When he woke, he smiled and said, "You should rest more. I'll handle the chores." But Diep, stubborn as ever, insisted she could manage. Now, as she stirred the porridge, she whispered softly to herself, "He must be cold this morning." She wrapped up the porridge in a small bowl and walked toward the fields, her footsteps crunching against the frost-covered ground. James arrived just as the sun broke through the clouds. He looked different in the daylight, his sharp suit replaced by a simple jacket and worn boots. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice warm and easy. "Did you sleep well?" Diep nodded, embarrassed by his presence. "Yes, thank you for staying last night." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," James replied. "You looked pale. I was worried." She smiled faintly and handed in the bowl of porridge. "You should eat something before you leave." He took the bowl, noticing her red, roughened hands. "Your hands," he murmured, his brow furrowing. "They're freezing. Have you been out since dawn?" "I'm used to it," she said softly. "The garden won't take care of itself." James chuckled, shaking his head. "You're incredible, Diep. You work harder than anyone I know." He blew gently on the spoonful of porridge and took a bite. "Delicious," he said with a smile. Diep looked down, her cheeks warming. "It's just plain rice." "Then maybe I like plain things," he said quietly. And for a moment, their eyes met. It was a simple exchange, but it lingered in her chest like a soft flame that refused to fade. After breakfast, James prepared to leave for the city. "I'll send someone to bring you some new garden tools," he said. "Don't cut all those bamboo poles by yourself. It's too heavy for you." "I can handle it," Diep replied quickly. "I don't want to trouble you." "You're not troubling me," James insisted. "You're helping me by taking care of the farm. Let me help you in return." Before she could respond, he smiled and waved goodbye, the sound of his truck fading into the distance. For a long moment, Diep stood there, watching the dust rise from the road, her heart tightening. When she returned to her small garden, she picked up the sickle and began cutting bamboo. Each strike echoed in the cool air, mixing with the rhythm of her thoughts. She was not afraid of work, only of feeling too much. James's kindness unsettled her. It made her dream of things she had long buried: warmth, laughter, companionship. She feared what would happen if those dreams returned, only to vanish again. By noon, Deep walked to the local market carrying a basket of ripe pomelos from James's orchard. She greeted the familiar vendors, set her basket on the stall, and began calling out cheerfully, "Fresh pomelos!" Only 20,000 apiece. The townspeople adored her honesty and sincerity. Within an hour, most of the fruit was gone. One elderly woman pressed an extra bill into Diep's hand, saying, "You're such a sweet girl. Keep the change." Diep bowed gratefully. "Thank you, Auntie." May your day be full of joy. When the last pomelo was sold, Diep took the money she earned and went straight to the hardware shop. There, she bought a small watering can she had been eyeing for weeks. "For the vegetables," she murmured to herself, smiling. On her way back, she stopped at the Riverside Cafe to meet Tung, the man who had agreed to buy her old pomelo farm. He greeted her warmly. "Miss Deep, your fruits are the best I've ever seen. I'll take the whole orchard." "Thank you," Deep said sincerely. "I'll make sure the documents are ready by next week." Tung nodded. "You've worked hard. You deserve good things." She smiled faintly but said nothing. Good things. How strange those words sounded to her. When James returned that evening, he found her sitting on the porch, patching an old blanket. "You're working again," he said with a sigh. Diep looked up. "There's always something to do." He knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "You shouldn't push yourself. Your hands are trembling." "They always tremble," she whispered, looking away. James frowned, noticing the faint scratches across her skin. Without a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tube of ointment. "Here. It'll help with the wounds." Deep hesitated. "You shouldn't waste money on me." "It's not a waste," he said softly. "You're important to me." Her breath caught. "Important?" she repeated, almost afraid of the word. "Yes," James said firmly. "You've done so much for me, for this place. Don't think I haven't noticed." The silence that followed was tender but heavy. The air between them seemed to hum with unspoken emotions. Finally, Deep looked down at her lap. "You're kind, James." "Too kind." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," he said. "Sometimes people come into your life for a reason. I think you're one of those people." The next day, James took her to his company headquarters. Diep had never been inside such a place. Polished floors, glass walls, and employees in crisp uniforms. She felt out of place, tugging nervously at her sleeves. James noticed her discomfort and smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry, you're with me." In the conference room, he met with his team to discuss a shipment of wood from local suppliers. "We've had delays," one manager said, "but the quality remains high. We'll need to adjust the schedule." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Make sure the farmers are paid before the holiday. They rely on us." Deep watched him quietly from the corner of the room. This was a different side of James, confident, decisive, respected. She felt a strange sense of pride swelling in her chest. He wasn't just a kind man, he was a leader. When the meeting ended, he turned to her with a grin. "You see? Not so scary after all." She smiled shyly. "I didn't know you were so serious at work." "I'm only serious when I have to be," he joked. "Most of the time, I'd rather be back at the farm with you." Later that afternoon, James stopped at a small boutique and bought a scarf and a pair of gloves. "These will keep you warm," he said, handing them to her. Diep blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied. "Consider it a thank you gift." "For what?" "For being you," he said simply. They continued walking, eventually stopping at an old cafe tucked behind a row of trees. "This place," James said, "is my secret project. I plan to open it one day, a quiet spot for people who want to escape the noise of the city." Deep looked around, admiring the rustic wooden tables and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. "It's beautiful," she whispered. James nodded. I want you to be the first to see it." As they sat together, he snapped a photo of her with his phone. "A memory," he said when she looked puzzled, "so I can remember today." Deep laughed softly. "You'll forget me once work gets busy." James leaned forward, his eyes gentle but intense. "I couldn't forget you if I tried." Their quiet moment was interrupted when a young woman entered the cafe. Lynn, James's secretary who had just returned from overseas. "James," she exclaimed with delight, "it's been too long." James stood, greeting her warmly. "Welcome back, Lynn. You've met Deep?" Lynn smiled at Deep and extended her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "You must be the reason he smiles more lately." Deep blushed, shaking her hand. "I'm just helping with the farm." Lynn laughed lightly. "Don't be modest. You've changed him, you know. He used to live for his work. Now he lives for something else." James coughed lightly, changing the topic, but the warmth in his eyes betrayed him. Deep didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, someone had spoken of her as if she were part of someone's happiness. That evening, they returned to the farm. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. Deep prepared a simple dinner while James fixed the garden hose. When they finally sat down to eat, the candles flickered softly between them. "It's peaceful here," James said, taking a sip of tea. "It's home," Deep replied quietly. He smiled. "Then maybe I should stay longer." She looked at him, unsure if he was joking. "You have a company to run. I also have a heart to follow," he said. "Sometimes those two don't agree." The words hung between them, tender and dangerous. Deep lowered her gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't say things like that unless you mean them." "I always mean what I say," James replied. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees and Hockey barked softly in the distance. They finished their meal in silence, the kind of silence that says everything words cannot. When James finally stood to leave, he turned to her and said, "Take care of yourself, and remember, Diep, your tears should only be for happiness." She nodded, her chest tightening. "Good night, James." As his car disappeared down the road, Diep stood at the doorway, the night air cool against her face. She whispered into the darkness, "Does he love me, or just feel sorry for me?" The stars gave no answer, but somewhere deep inside, a fragile hope began to bloom. The following days passed quietly on the farm. Morning mist rolled through the fields, coating the leaves in silver dew. Tu Diep rose early as always, feeding the hens, watering the vegetables, and checking the pomelo trees James had planted months ago. Her days were full, yet something new stirred beneath the surface, a strange mix of warmth and unease. Ever since that evening at the cafe, her thoughts of James had grown heavier. His kindness was no longer something she could brush aside. Every time he spoke to her, every time his gaze lingered a little too long, she felt her heart tremble like fragile glass. One morning, as she was pruning the garden, Lynn's car pulled up. The young woman stepped out gracefully, her polished shoes sinking slightly into the soil. "Good morning, Diep," she greeted cheerfully. "James sent me to check on the farm and bring you some supplies." Deep wiped her hands on her apron and smiled politely. "That's very kind of you, Miss Lynn. Please, come in." Lynn followed her into the small house, glancing around curiously. "You live here alone? It's so quiet and peaceful." "Yes," Deep said softly. "I like it that way." Lynn nodded, setting down the boxes she brought. "James worries about you, you know. He talks about you at work, how hardworking and dedicated you are." Deep froze for a moment before replying, "He's too generous with his words." Lynn smiled knowingly. "Maybe, but you should know, people are starting to notice. A few of his colleagues have been asking questions." "Questions?" Diep asked cautiously. Lynn hesitated. "About you, about why the CEO spends so much time here instead of in the city. Some think he's distracted. Others think..." She trailed off. "Think what?" Lynn sighed. "That you might be the reason he's changing." Deep's heart sank. She had feared this. "That's not true," she said quietly. "James has his work. I don't interfere." "I know," Lynn replied softly, "but the world doesn't always see things clearly. I just thought you should be prepared. When Lynn left, Diep stood by the window, watching the car disappear into the dusty road. Her hands trembled slightly. For the first time, she felt the weight of other people's eyes, unseen but heavy. Later that afternoon, James arrived unexpectedly. "Diep," he called out, walking toward the garden. "I brought you something." She turned, masking her unease with a smile. "You shouldn't have come all this way. You must be busy." "I was nearby," he said, setting down a small box. Inside was a new pair of gardening gloves and a bottle of hand cream. "For your hands," he explained. "They deserve better care." Diep looked at the gifts but said nothing. James noticed her silence. "What's wrong?" She hesitated before speaking. "Lynn came by today." "Oh?" He looked pleasantly surprised. "That's good. I asked her to deliver the supplies. She also said people at your company are talking about us." James frowned. "Talking?" "Yes," Diep whispered. "That you've changed, that I'm distracting you. I don't want to cause trouble for you." He sighed deeply. "Diep, listen to me. People will always talk. Let them. I don't care what they say." "But I do," she said, her voice trembling. "You have a reputation, a company to protect. I'm just—" "Stop," he interrupted gently, stepping closer. "Don't say you're just anything. You're more than enough, Diep." Tears filled her eyes. "James, please don't make this harder. I don't belong in your world." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "You belong wherever your heart takes you," he said softly, "and mine keeps bringing me here." Diep turned away, unable to look at him. "You should go," she whispered, "before people see." James hesitated, pain flashing in his eyes. Then, without another word, he walked back to his car. The sound of the engine faded into the evening air, leaving only the soft chirping of cicadas behind. That night, Diep couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon rise above the hills. Her thoughts spiraled between fear and longing. She remembered the way James looked at her, the warmth in his voice, the way he made her feel safe. But safety was not love, she told herself. And love, for someone like her, was a luxury she could not afford. The next morning, she decided to keep busy. She carried baskets of vegetables to the market, greeting customers with her usual smile. But whispers followed her wherever she went. "That's the woman who works for the rich foreign boss," someone said. "They say he visits her every week," another added. "Must be nice," a third voice sneered, "to have someone like that taking care of you." Diep's cheeks burned. She finished her sales quickly and left the market, her heart pounding. When she reached home, she sat down on the porch, burying her face in her hands. The world was cruel, she thought. It could twist kindness into shame and love into scandal. Days later, James returned again, this time more serious than before. "We need to talk," he said. Diep avoided his gaze. "There's nothing to talk about." "There's everything to talk about," he replied firmly. "I heard what people are saying. I also heard you've been avoiding the market." "I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly. "You deserve someone who fits into your life, not someone who complicates it." James's jaw tightened. "You think I care about status or gossip?" "I think you'll care eventually," she whispered, "when it starts to hurt your company, your image." He interrupted her, his voice sharp with emotion. "My image doesn't matter if I lose you." Diep froze, staring at him. "Don't say that." "It's the truth," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "Diep, I'm not asking you to be anyone else. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you, no matter what people say." Her lips trembled. "You don't understand." "You have choices, James. I don't. If people talk about you, you can ignore them. But if they talk about me, I lose everything." He fell silent, realizing the depth of her fear. Finally, he stepped back and nodded slowly. "If you truly believe that distance will protect you, I'll respect it, but I'm not giving up." As he left, Diep stood motionless, tears running down her cheeks. She wanted to run after him, to tell him how much his words meant, but fear held her still. Fear of losing the fragile peace she had rebuilt after so many years of pain. Weeks passed without seeing him. The days felt longer, colder. Diep threw herself into work, hoping exhaustion would numb her thoughts. Yet every morning, when she looked toward the empty road leading to the farm, her heart ached. One rainy afternoon, Lynn appeared again. This time, her expression was serious. "Diep," she said gently, "James hasn't been himself lately. He misses you." Diep shook her head. "He should forget me. It's better for both of us." Lynn sighed. "You're stronger than I thought. But maybe you're also too hard on yourself." She paused before adding, "Do you know why James built this cafe? He said he wanted a place where people could start over, a place where love didn't have to hide." Diep blinked back tears. "He said that?" Lynn nodded. "Yes. And I think that place was meant for you." That evening, Diep went to the cafe. It was closed, empty except for the faint scent of coffee and rain. She sat at one of the tables, staring at the photo James had taken of her weeks ago, the one hanging quietly on the wall. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "Built with care, inspired by courage." Her heart ached. She realized that every kind word, every thoughtful gesture had not been pity. It had been love, patient and sincere. When she returned home, she found a small package waiting at the door. Inside was a note in James's handwriting, "For when you're ready to believe that you deserve happiness too." Beneath the note was a tiny pendant in the shape of a pomelo flower, simple, fragile, and beautiful. Diep pressed it to her chest, tears spilling down her cheeks. For the first time, she whispered into the empty room, maybe I do." The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds. Diep stepped outside, wearing the pendant around her neck. The farm glistened with light, the air fresh and full of promise. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine hummed softly, familiar, steady, and warm. She turned toward the sound, her heart racing. Perhaps this time she would not run. The morning was bright and still when James's car finally stopped at the edge of the farm. For days he had been driving aimlessly, caught between reason and longing. But today his heart had led him back to the one place that ever felt like peace. The road was wet from last night's rain, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. When he stepped out, the familiar sound of rustling leaves greeted him. He walked slowly toward the house, unsure of what he would find, or if she would even want to see him. Every step echoed with the memory of their last conversation, of her trembling voice saying she did not belong in his world. But as he reached the gate, he froze. There she was, Tu Diep, kneeling among the rows of vegetables, sunlight glinting off the small pendant at her neck. His pendant, the pomelo flower he had sent her. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply watched her, his heart swelling with a quiet ache. Then, softly, he called, "Diep." She looked up, startled. The watering can slipped from her hand. "James?" He smiled gently. "You didn't think I'd stay away forever, did you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She stood, brushing the soil from her hands. "Why are you here?" "Because I couldn't stay away," he said simply. "I've been thinking about everything you said, about our differences, about the world we live in, and I realized something." Diep crossed her arms, more to steady herself than to appear cold. "And what did you realize?" "That love isn't about belonging to the same world," he replied. "It's about building one together." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," James admitted, "but nothing worth keeping ever is." They stood there in silence, the air between them thick with things unsaid. Finally, Diep took a deep breath. "James, you don't know what people have been saying. They call me names. They say I'm using you. They think I don't care what they think," he interrupted, his voice firm but calm. "I care about you, about what you think. So tell me, Diep, do you love me?" She froze, her breath catching. "That's not fair." "It's the only thing that's ever been fair," he said softly. "If you don't love me, I'll leave and never trouble you again. But if you do, then stop letting fear decide for you." Her hands trembled at her sides. She turned away, staring at the distant hills. I've lost everything once before. My marriage, my home, my pride. I can't lose again. James stepped closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. You won't lose me. When she turned back to him, her eyes met his, and in that quiet moment she saw no pity, only love, the kind that was steady, patient, and real. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered, I love you. James closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. For a long moment they stood there, two souls from different worlds finding balance in the same breath. He smiled. Then it's settled. We face the world together. Deep laughed through her tears. You make it sound like a business plan. He grinned. Maybe it is. Partnership, trust, long-term investment, all in one. She hit his arm lightly. You're impossible. And you love that about me, he teased. I do, she admitted softly. Over the next few weeks, life began to shift. Word spread through the village that the rich CEO still visited the humble farmer's home. But this time, the whispers changed. People saw the way James helped harvest crops, how he laughed with the locals, how Diep never acted proud or distant. Slowly, curiosity turned into respect. At the market, where once there had been gossip, there was now admiration. That's her, someone said, the one the CEO is with. She's not what I expected, another replied. She's kind, and she still sells her own fruit. Diep didn't pay attention to the words anymore. She had learned something precious, that dignity wasn't given by others, it was built by living honestly. James, true to his promise, began expanding the farm. He hired local workers, built a small storage house, and installed new irrigation systems. We'll make this place more than a farm, he said. We'll make it a home. One evening, after a long day's work, they sat by the porch watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. The light turned the fields golden, and the air was filled with the scent of ripe pomelos. Deep leaned against the railing, her voice soft. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Choosing me? Choosing this life? James smiled, shaking his head. No. If anything, this is the first decision that ever felt right. She laughed quietly. You're a terrible liar. He reached for her hand. Then look at me and tell me I don't mean it. She did, and what she saw silenced her completely. The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. A few days later, Lynn visited the farm again. Well, she said with a grin, looks like the rumors were wrong after all. James laughed. I told you, Lynn, I don't care about rumors. Lynn nodded approvingly. And now the board doesn't either. They've seen the results. You've doubled production this quarter. Deep smiled shyly. That's all James is doing. Not just his, Lynn said warmly. You're part of this too, Deep. Don't ever forget that. When Lynn left, Deep turned to James. You didn't tell me about the board. He shrugged. Why would I? It doesn't matter. It matters to me, she said, because I know what it cost you. James reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The only thing that would have cost me is losing you. She smiled faintly, her heart full. That night, a gentle rain fell over the countryside. Inside the small house, the fire crackled softly. Deep brewed tea while James fixed a loose window latch. It was an ordinary night, but to them, it felt extraordinary. You know, James said, sipping his tea, when I first met you, I thought you were the strongest person I'd ever seen. She chuckled. Strong? I was a mess. Exactly, he said. And yet, you kept going. You never let life break you. Deep smiled, her eyes glistening. Maybe that's why we found each other. You needed someone to remind you what really matters. He nodded. And you needed someone to remind you that you deserve love. They sat in silence, the sound of rain against the roof filling the space between their words. Outside, the fields shimmered with silver light. Months passed, and the farm thrived. Together, they built new greenhouses, expanded production, and created a small cafe on the property, the same dream James once shared. On the opening day, people from the village came to celebrate. The air buzzed with laughter, music, and the aroma of fresh fruit and coffee. Standing before the crowd, James raised his glass. "This place," he began, "isn't just a business. It's proof that love and hard work can grow anywhere, even between two people the world thought would never belong together." Applause erupted, and Diep felt her heart swell with pride. When the crowd dispersed, she found James by the orchard. He was watching the sunset again, that same soft smile on his lips. "Still dreaming?" she teased. "Always," he said, "but this time I'm dreaming with my eyes open." She laughed, stepping closer. "And what do you see?" He turned to her, his voice quiet. "You. Always you." As night fell, the lanterns lit up one by one, casting golden reflections on the pond. Diep rested her head on James's shoulder, the sound of crickets blending with the soft hum of the evening. "Do you think people will ever stop judging?" she asked. James looked at the stars. "Maybe not. But that's all right. As long as we keep living our truth, their voices will fade." She smiled, closing her eyes. "Then let them talk." He kissed the top of her head. "Let them. We'll be too busy living." The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers and new beginnings. Years later, the farm became one of the most successful eco-projects in the region. Visitors came from far and wide, not just to see the crops, but to hear the story of the woman who turned hardship into strength, and the man who saw love beyond status. At the edge of the orchard stood a wooden sign carved with simple words, "Built on faith, grown with love." Beneath it, Diep and James often sat together, watching the sunset, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally at peace. And though the world outside kept changing, one thing never did: the quiet certainty that love, when true, could bridge even the widest of worlds.